Under the fading orange glow of a late summer sunset, the dust rose like thin smoke across the quiet valley. The wind came soft and tired from the south, carrying the scent of dry grass and old timber, whispering through the brittle fences that lined the road. In the distance, the little town of Red Hollow seemed almost painted against the horizon, its saloon lanterns flickering to life one by one as evening began to settle heavy across the plains. It was the kind of town where nothing much ever changed. Folks lived slow, steady lives, bound by routine, by silence, and by the land that demanded more than it gave. But that night something felt different. There was a strange hush lying over the ranch lands east of town, something that didn't belong. The sky stretched out wide and open, but even the crickets seemed to have quieted. A lone rider moved along the ridge above the creek, his horse's hooves striking against the hard-packed earth with a hollow rhythm. The man rode tall in the saddle, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the valley below. He had the look of someone used to the land, someone who'd known hard days and longer nights. He was a rancher by trade, though few in town ever saw him except at the supply store or during cattle drives. Folks said he kept to himself after his brother's passing, that grief had built fences around his heart the way he built them around his fields, high and solid, meant to keep the world out. His ranch sat on the edge of nowhere, beyond the river bend and the narrow pass where coyotes like to cry at night. That's where he was headed now, back home, when the faint sound reached him. A voice. It was small, broken, carried on the wind. He pulled the reins and turned his head, listening. For a moment there was nothing but the low moan of the wind through the grass. Then it came again, clearer this time. A woman's voice, easy. It hurts. The rancher's hand froze mid-motion. His horse shifted nervously beneath him, snorting. He scanned the slope below, eyes narrowing. The sound had come from somewhere near the creek. He dismounted, boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud, and led his horse down the incline. The air grew cooler the closer he got to the water, and the smell of damp earth mixed with something else. Iron, faint and sharp. "Hello?" he called out, voice low but steady. "Someone there?" No answer. Only the quiet rush of the creek against the stones. He moved closer, crouching low beneath the willows. Then he saw her. A woman lay half hidden among the reeds, her dress torn and stained with mud. Her hair was tangled, one arm clutching her side as if trying to hold something in place. Her breathing came shallow, labored. When she turned her head slightly toward him, he saw the fear in her eyes, wild, trembling, as though she didn't know whether to trust him or run. He took a slow step forward, careful not to startle her. "You're hurt," he said softly. "Let me help." Her lips parted, but the words that came out were faint, barely above a whisper. "Please, don't let him find me." The rancher stopped cold. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the darkening woods. "Who?" he asked. She shook her head weakly, tears glistening in the fading light. "He'll kill me if he knows I spoke." The rancher knelt beside her, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The cut along her ribs looked deep, but not fatal. Her wrists were bruised as though she'd been tied. Whoever had done this hadn't meant to be kind. He pulled off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe here." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. The sun dipped behind the ridge, and shadows crept up the creek bed. He helped her sit up slowly, steadying her with one hand. She winced in pain, whispering, "Don't, please, it hurts." He froze again, unsure how to move without making things worse. He wasn't used to this. He knew cattle, not people. Still, there was something about her voice, about the way she tried to stay strong even through the pain, that struck something deep in him. He took a deep breath. "I'll get you to my ranch. You'll be safe there." She looked at him, distrust flickering behind her eyes. "You don't understand." "He'll come looking. He always does." "Then let him come," the rancher said quietly. "He won't find you." A rustle came from somewhere beyond the trees, sharp and sudden. The rancher's hand went to the revolver on his hip, instinct taking over. He scanned the shadows, heart pounding. The sound came again, footsteps heavy and deliberate. Someone was out there, watching. The woman's grip tightened on his arm. "It's him," she breathed. The rancher didn't move. His pulse thudded in his ears, but he kept his voice low. "Stay quiet." The footsteps stopped. Then silence. Not the kind that comes naturally, but the kind that listens back. He waited a long moment before speaking. "Can you stand?" She nodded weakly. He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they made their way up toward the ridge. His horse shifted anxiously when they emerged from the brush, ears flicking. The rancher lifted her into the saddle, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm steady around her to hold her upright. They rode without a word, the night deepening around them. Behind them, the woods remained still, but the rancher couldn't shake the feeling they weren't alone. By the time they reached the ranch, the moon had risen high, pale and cold against the black sky. The cabin sat quiet, smoke trailing faintly from the chimney. He dismounted and carried her inside, laying her gently on the cot near the hearth. The woman's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "You shouldn't have helped me," she murmured. He frowned. "I wasn't gonna leave you out there. He'll come for you now, too." The rancher didn't answer. He poured water into a basin and began cleaning the wound at her side. She winced again, whispering, "Easy. It hurts." His hands paused. The sound of her voice, soft, pained, pleading, cut through the quiet like a blade. For the first time in years, something inside him stirred. Not fear, not anger. Something gentler, something he thought he'd buried long ago. He drew in a slow breath, forcing his hands to steady. "I'll be careful," he said. She looked at him, eyes full of something between gratitude and sorrow. "You don't even know who I am," he met her gaze. "Doesn't matter right now." Outside, the wind began to rise, pushing against the old windows. The rancher crossed to bolt the door. Somewhere out in the distance, a lone horse whinnied, a sound that didn't belong to any of his herd. He turned toward the window, staring into the darkness, and then, faint but unmistakable, came the echo of boots on dry ground. He froze. The woman stirred on the cot, eyes widening. "He's here," she whispered. The rancher's jaw tightened. He reached for his revolver and blew out the lamp, leaving only the flicker of the firelight to dance across the walls. The air grew heavy, charged with quiet tension. Outside, the footsteps stopped right at the porch. The rancher raised the gun, heart hammering. A shadow moved across the window, tall, deliberate. For a moment, neither man nor woman breathed. Then, the sound of a hand testing the doorknob. The woman's fingers dug into the blanket. "Please, don't let him in." The rancher's finger tightened slightly on the trigger, and in that breathless silence, the door creaked, just enough to let the cold night air spill inside. He didn't move. Couldn't. The fire popped once, sharp as a gunshot, and the rancher, still as stone, waited. The rancher stood frozen in the dark, the cold draft from the open door crawling across the floorboards. His hand hovered near the trigger, every muscle locked tight. The firelight flickered against his face, outlining the sharp cut of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. The woman on the cot held her breath, her wide eyes fixed on the door. The silence stretched thin, like a thread ready to snap. Then came the slow creak of a boot on wood. Whoever stood outside wasn't in a hurry. Each step was deliberate, heavy. The rancher's horse snorted outside, uneasy. Another sound followed, the faint clink of metal like a spur brushing against the step. "Who's there?" the rancher called, voice low but firm. No answer. Only the wind shifting through the grass. He took one careful step forward, revolver raised, watching the door as if it might breathe. The figure outside shifted again, the shadow stretching long across the threshold. Then, after a long moment, the sound of retreating footsteps, slow, fading. The woman's trembling voice broke the quiet. "He knows where I am now." The rancher didn't lower his gun. He waited until the footsteps were gone, then moved to close the door fully and drop the bar into place. The fire popped again, sending a thin spark into the air. He turned back toward her, his expression caught between worry and anger. "You're gonna tell me what this is about," he said quietly. She didn't speak right away. Her breathing was still unsteady, her face pale in the dim light. When she finally met his eyes, there was something haunted in her gaze. "You don't want to know." "I wouldn't be asking if I didn't," he replied. She looked down, pulling the coat tighter around her shoulders. "It started 3 weeks ago. I was working at the post in Red Hollow, just helping out, writing ledgers, cleaning, keeping things straight. Then a man came in. He said he had a letter for someone in town, but he didn't leave a name. He just wanted it held behind the counter. When I looked at the envelope later, I saw blood on the corner. I should have thrown it away. But I didn't." The rancher's brow furrowed. "What was in it?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "I never read it." But the next morning, the sheriff was found shot down by the riverbank, and that man came back, looking for me. The rancher stared at her in silence, the fire crackling softly between them. "He said I'd taken something from him. She whispered. Something worth killing for. I ran that night. Been hiding ever since? He leaned back against the table, the weight of her words settling heavy in his chest. He'd heard of men like that before, ones who drifted through town with polite smiles and cruel eyes, always chasing something they couldn't claim. Still, something didn't add up. You're saying this man's the one outside? She nodded. He doesn't stop. I've crossed 3 counties. Every time I think I've lost him, I see his horse again. Her eyes darted toward the door. You don't understand, he doesn't leave loose ends. The rancher looked away, jaw tightening. Well, he picked the wrong place to chase his trouble. He moved to the window, peering out into the dark. The wind had stilled now. The ranch lay silent except for the creak of the barn doors in the distance. He could feel the night pressing close, heavy with the kind of tension he hadn't felt since the war. You said there was blood on that letter, he said after a moment. You sure you didn't see what was inside? I swear I didn't, she said softly. But he thinks I did, and now he'll come for you too. He turned back to her, eyes steady. Let him try. For a long moment they said nothing. The fire burned low and the air grew colder. The rancher set another log on the flames and sat at the edge of the cot. She flinched slightly at his nearness, still half afraid. You got a name? He asked. She hesitated before answering. Clara, he nodded once. All right, Clara, you rest now. I'll keep watch. She looked at him uncertainly. You'd do that for someone you just met? He shrugged. Ain't the first time I've taken in trouble that wasn't mine. Clara's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, the fear in her face eased. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under. The rancher sat still, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, his thoughts tangled in the quiet. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the faint rustle of something moving near the barn. He stood slowly, every instinct sharp. He stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaking under his boots. The moonlight stretched pale across the empty corral. Nothing moved, but he could feel eyes somewhere in the dark, watching. He waited a long time before going back inside. Clara hadn't moved. He set his gun down beside the chair but kept his hand near it. Sleep didn't come easy that night. By morning, the world outside had turned gray and cold. A thin mist lay across the field, softening the outlines of the hills. Clara stirred as the light touched her face, blinking slowly. You didn't sleep, she murmured. Didn't plan to, he replied. He poured her a cup of water and handed it to her. You should eat something. Then we'll figure what to do next. She nodded faintly, still weak. I shouldn't stay here. He'll find this place. He looked out the window toward the long road that wound down to town. If he's looking, he'll find you no matter where you run. But I got men coming tomorrow for the cattle drive. If we can make it till then, I'll get you safe. She stared at him, a flicker of hope breaking through her fear. Why are you helping me? He hesitated before answering. Maybe because no one helped when my brother needed it. Maybe I'm just trying to do it different this time. Clara's gaze softened again, though her hand still trembled slightly around the cup. Hours passed in quiet work. The rancher moved through his chores with mechanical focus, checking fences, gathering wood, always keeping one eye on the distant ridge. Clara tried to help, though she was still weak, mostly tending the fire and cleaning what she could. As the afternoon light turned gold, she found herself standing near the window, staring out toward the hills. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked softly. He paused at the door, adjusting the saddle strap he'd been mending. Used to. After the war, I thought I'd head east, maybe start fresh. But the land here, it's quiet. Make sense of things. Until someone like me shows up, she said with a small, sad smile. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Life's got a way of stirring the dust when you least expect it. Before she could answer, a sound cracked across the still air, the sharp report of a rifle. The window behind her shattered, glass scattering across the floor. Clara dropped to her knees with a gasp. The rancher was on her in an instant, pulling her down behind the table. Stay down, he hissed. He grabbed his gun and crawled toward the doorway, peering out. A figure moved along the far ridge, small against the sky but clear enough to see the glint of metal in his hand. Another shot rang out, splintering the doorframe. Clara's breath came quick and shallow. It's him, the rancher ducked back inside, his face tight. He's got range on us from up there. Can't get a clean shot. What do we do? She whispered. He checked the revolver, half loaded. We wait till he comes closer. He won't waste bullets forever. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. The air in the cabin grew thick with smoke and dust. Outside, the gunfire stopped. Only the low whistle of the wind filled the silence. Clara looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. Maybe he's gone. The rancher didn't answer. He moved to the window, careful not to show himself, scanning the ridge. The slope was empty, but he knew better than to believe peace came that easy. He turned back toward Clara. Pack what you can carry. We're leaving before dark. She shook her head. He'll see us. He'll see us if we stay too, he said. There's a trail through the canyon. Hard to track if we move quiet. She hesitated, but when she saw the resolve in his face, she nodded. By the time the sun began to set, the two of them were already on horseback, moving through the brush behind the ranch. The sky was painted red and gold, the air sharp with the scent of pine. Neither spoke as they rode, every sound magnified in the stillness. When they reached the edge of the canyon, the rancher stopped and looked back. His ranch stood small and lonely against the open plain, the smoke from the chimney barely visible now. Clara followed his gaze. You think he's still out there? He nodded slowly. Men like that don't quit easy. As they rode down into the shadowed canyon, the wind rose again, carrying the faint echo of hooves somewhere far behind them. Clara turned, her face pale in the fading light. He's following us, she whispered. The rancher's hand went to his gun. Then we keep moving. The canyon swallowed them whole, its walls closing in as the sky above turned from gold to gray. Somewhere in the distance, a single crow called out, lonely and sharp, and as the sound faded, the rancher knew the night ahead would test them both. The chase wasn't over, not by a long shot. The canyon was darker than the rancher expected. The walls rose high and narrow, blocking out most of the evening light, and every sound seemed to echo. The steady clop of hooves, the rustle of dry brush, even the soft creak of saddle leather all seemed louder than they should have been. The woman clung quietly to the reins of her horse, following just behind him, her eyes darting between the shadows. They had been riding for nearly an hour since leaving the ranch, and the silence between them was thick. The rancher's mind worked in circles, trying to make sense of it all. The man on the ridge, the letter, the blood, the sheriff's death. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed that Clara had been caught in something far larger than she realized. As they rounded a bend, the canyon widened slightly. A few stunted trees grew near the creek that wound through the center, their branches black against the dim light. The rancher slowed his horse and gestured for her to stop. We'll rest here for a bit, he said. Clara nodded, dismounting slowly. She winced when her feet hit the ground, her side still tender from the wound. He noticed but didn't say anything, only helped her to sit on a flat stone by the creek. The water caught what little light there was, reflecting it like silver. Do you think he's still following? She asked quietly. He glanced back the way they came. If he is, he's keeping his distance, but he will catch up eventually. Clara looked down at her hands, her voice trembling. I didn't mean for anyone else to get hurt. I just wanted to get away. The rancher crouched near the water, splashing some on his face. You did what you had to. Folks don't get to choose when trouble finds them. She was quiet for a while after that, watching him. There was something about the way he spoke, steady, grounded, that gave her a strange sense of calm, even in the middle of fear. She wondered what kind of pain sat behind his eyes to make him so still. After a few moments, she said softly, You mentioned your brother before. What happened to him? He paused, still crouched by the water. For a long time, he didn't answer. Then he said, He was killed 2 winters ago. Cattle thieves came in the night. We fought him off, but he took a bullet before dawn. His voice was even, but the hurt beneath it was plain. Sheriff never found who did it. Just another name carved on the hill. Clara lowered her gaze. I'm sorry, he nodded once, standing. Sorry don't bring folks back. But it does make a man think twice about letting something like it happen again. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the smell of dust and dry sage. A hawk cried somewhere above the canyon rim. The rancher scanned the cliffs again. Something about the quiet didn't sit right with him. It felt too deep, too hollow. Stay here, he said suddenly. Don't move. He moved toward the mouth of the canyon, keeping low, eyes narrowing. A faint sound reached him, a rock tumbling, a distant echo of hooves against stone. Someone was moving along the ridge above them. He returned to her quickly. We're not alone. Her eyes widened. He found us already? Maybe, or maybe not just him. What do you mean? He didn't answer, only began saddling the horses again. Let's move deeper in. There's an old mining cabin farther down this trail. Should still be standing. They rode again, Faster this time, the canyon narrowing once more around them. The horses' hooves struck sparks off the stone, and every sound seemed to chase them down the path. Behind them, somewhere unseen, the faint rhythm of another horse echoed back. Clara looked over her shoulder. "He's close." "I know." The trail twisted, forcing them to slow as they crossed a shallow stream. The water glimmered faintly under the moonlight, now breaking through the clouds. Ahead, the land began to open again, a small clearing where an old cabin sat half hidden under a slope of rock. Its roof sagged, but the walls still held. The rancher helped Clara dismount, and they led the horses around the back where the shadows were thickest. The cabin door creaked when he pushed it open, revealing the faint smell of old wood and dust. He lit a small lantern and set it on the floor. Inside were remnants of another life, a broken chair, a rusted stove, a few scattered tools. Clara sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, breathing hard. "Why would anyone follow me this far?" she whispered. "It doesn't make sense." The rancher paced near the window. "Maybe it ain't about you anymore. Maybe you got something he wants more than he wants revenge. But I don't have anything. Maybe not on purpose." She frowned, trying to think. Then slowly she reached into the pocket of her torn dress. "There was one thing. I forgot about it until now." She pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased, stained, but still intact. The rancher's eyes narrowed as she handed it to him. "I found it tucked under the counter the day before I left the post," she said. "I thought it was just a receipt, but maybe it's what he's after." He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a crude map, hand-drawn lines marking the ridge above Red Hollow, a river bend, and something marked with an X deep within the canyon where they now stood. The rancher exhaled slowly. "Well, that explains a few things. What is it?" "Looks like a claim. Could be gold, maybe silver. Men have killed for less." Clara's hands trembled. "Then the sheriff, he must have known. That's why he was killed." The rancher nodded grimly. "And that man's still chasing the only person who might have seen it." Before she could answer, a sharp knock echoed from outside. Not loud, but unmistakable. 3 raps. Then silence. The rancher froze. His hand went to his gun. He blew out the lantern, plunging them into darkness. Clara pressed a hand over her mouth, eyes wide. The knock came again, slower this time. The rancher whispered, "Stay quiet." He moved to the window, peering out through the slats. The clearing was empty, but shadows moved along the ridge above. One figure, then another. Not just one man, 2, maybe 3. He turned back to her. "There's more than one. Looks like they've been tracking you together." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "What do they want with me?" "I didn't do anything." He crouched beside her. "You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They probably think you still got something more. Proof, maybe. Or they just want to tie up the last witness." A branch snapped outside. The horses stamped nervously. The sound of low voices drifted through the walls. The rancher's grip on his revolver tightened. "If they try to force that door, you get behind the stove and don't move. But do as I say." He moved toward the door, positioning himself to the side. The footsteps drew closer. A hand tested the handle. He held his breath. The handle twisted slowly and the door creaked open an inch. The rancher waited until he saw the outline of a boot step across the threshold, then struck. He slammed the door shut with his shoulder, shoving it hard enough to make the intruder stumble. A curse followed, rough and low. Then came a gunshot, shattering the quiet. Clara ducked behind the stove as splinters rained across the floor. The rancher fired back once, the sound deafening in the small cabin. Then silence again. He reloaded quickly, every motion calm, practiced. The door still held, but he knew it wouldn't for long. From outside, a voice called out, "We just want the girl. Hand her over and you can walk away." The rancher didn't answer. "You don't know what you're protecting," the voice continued. "She's got no idea what she's mixed up in." Clara's voice broke the silence from behind the stove. "He's lying." The rancher nodded faintly. "I know." Another gunshot cracked, this one splintering the window. He ducked low, returning fire. The men outside scattered, their voices muffled now by the rock walls. When the echo faded, the rancher crossed the room and crouched beside her. "We can't stay here. There's a trail up the back wall. It's steep, but they won't expect us to take it." Clara nodded shakily. "All right." He helped her to her feet, the urgency in his movements clear. They slipped out through the back of the cabin, moving toward the slope where the rocks piled high. The climb was rough, loose stones shifting underfoot, but they pushed upward in silence. Halfway up, Clara glanced down and froze. Torchlight flickered below. 3 men spreading out near the cabin. "They're searching," she whispered. "Keep moving." When they reached the top, they crawled behind a line of boulders, catching their breath. The valley stretched below them, dark and still except for the dim glow of those torches. The rancher studied the men. "They're not just outlaws. They're organized." Clara frowned. "You think someone else sent them?" He nodded. "Someone who wants whatever's marked on that map bad enough to spill blood for it." She looked at the folded paper in his hand. "Then what do we do with it?" He tucked it into his coat. "First thing is making sure they don't get it. Then we find out what's really buried out here." The torches below began to move again, spreading out toward the lower path. The wind shifted, carrying the faint murmur of their voices. Clara turned to him, her face pale in the moonlight. "They'll follow us no matter where we go, won't they?" The rancher looked out across the canyon, the shadows deep and endless ahead. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Looks that way." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The night stretched out, cold and endless, and far below, the men's torches flickered like restless fireflies against the dark stone. The hunt wasn't over, and the canyon still held its secrets, waiting to be uncovered. The night air was sharp and cold at the top of the canyon ridge. The wind hissed softly through the rocks, carrying the faint echo of the men's voices far below. The rancher and Clara crouched behind a cluster of boulders, their breath shallow, trying not to make a sound. From up here, the torches looked small and distant, but the glow of firelight kept moving, spreading like a slow hunt through the valley. The rancher's hand rested on the revolver at his side, the metal cool beneath his fingers. He'd faced danger before, but this was different. These weren't just bandits chasing money. They were men with purpose, men who'd cross half the territory for whatever was buried out here. Clara leaned closer, whispering, "They won't stop until they find it, will they?" He shook his head. "No, not until one of us is gone." For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the wind. Then the rancher pointed toward a thin path that snaked along the ridge and disappeared into the darkness ahead. "That trail leads toward the upper canyon. If we keep to it, we can get to the old mine before dawn." "Why there?" she asked softly. "Because if this map's right, that's where the X is marked. Whatever they're after, it's there." Clara hesitated. "You really think it's worth finding?" He looked out toward the horizon, where the stars hung clear and cold above the black line of the hills. "I think it's the only way to end this." They started moving again, slow and careful. The path was narrow, the drop steep on one side, and loose stones slid under their boots as they climbed. The moonlight helped just enough to see, though the shadows were deep where the cliffs closed in. Each sound carried far, the distant hoot of an owl, the scrape of rock, the echo of their own steps. After a while, Clara broke the quiet. "You think it's gold?" "Could be," he said. "Or something worse." "What could be worse than gold?" "Secrets," he answered. "The kind men killed to keep." She fell silent again after that. The weight of his words hung heavy between them. As they climbed higher, the air grew colder, the smell of sage replaced by the sharp scent of stone and dust. The trail leveled out briefly, opening onto a small plateau. From there, the canyon stretched below them like a dark sea. They could see the flicker of torches still winding through the valley, closer now. The men hadn't given up. The rancher crouched, scanning the slope. "They're moving faster. We've got maybe an hour before they reach this height." Clara's voice trembled slightly. "Can we make it to the mine before then?" He nodded. "If we don't stop." They pressed on, the path twisting like a snake through the rocks. The wind was picking up again, throwing fine dust into their faces. The rancher walked ahead, steady and sure-footed, his silhouette cutting a dark shape against the pale stone. Clara followed close, clutching the folds of his coat she wore to keep warm. After what felt like forever, a shape began to form in the distance, black and jagged against the pale ridge. The mine entrance. It sat half-hidden beneath a slope of broken rock, the timbers supporting it warped with age. When they reached it, the rancher stopped to listen. Nothing but wind. He motioned for her to wait, then ducked inside, gun drawn. The darkness swallowed him. A few heartbeats later, his voice echoed softly from within. "It's clear." Clara stepped inside, the air damp and stale. The faint light of the moon reached only a few feet past the entrance, leaving the tunnel beyond black and silent. The rancher struck a match and lit a small lantern he'd found by the wall. The flame flickered weakly, revealing the narrow shaft disappearing into the rock. "Looks like nobody's been here in years," he muttered. Clara's eyes darted toward the darkness ahead. You really think it's in there? Only one way to know. They moved deeper into the mine, the sound of their steps echoing off the walls. The air grew colder, the smell of damp earth thick. The tunnel twisted and forked, and more than once the rancher had to stop and check their direction with the map. After a while, Clara noticed faint markings carved into the walls, strange symbols faded but still visible. What do you think these mean? He studied them briefly. Looks like miners' marks, probably used to mark territory. But these... He ran his fingers across one symbol that looked newer, cut sharper into the stone. This one's different. Before she could ask what he meant, a noise echoed faintly from behind them. A rock clattered to the floor somewhere near the entrance. Clara froze. They found us, she whispered. The rancher blew out the lantern. Darkness closed in fast, thick as smoke. Stay close to me. They moved deeper into the tunnel, guided only by touch and memory. Behind them, faint light flickered. Torches. Voices followed, spread out. They came this way. The sound of boots striking stone grew louder. The rancher grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her down a side passage. The air here was colder still, and the tunnel narrowed until they had to crouch. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. They stopped only when the light behind them faded again. Clara leaned against the wall, gasping softly. They're right behind us. What do we do now? He hesitated. We keep them guessing. If they think we went deeper, they'll split up. That'll give us a chance, but to do what? He didn't answer right away. Then in the dark, his voice came low. To find what they're after first. She could barely make out his face in the dim light filtering through a crack in the rock. His expression was hard, but there was something else in his eyes too. A glint of determination she hadn't seen before. They crept forward again, following the tunnel until it opened into a wider chamber. The air here felt different, older somehow. The walls glittered faintly where the lantern light brushed across them, tiny flecks of gold dust catching the glow. Clara gasped softly. It's real. The rancher knelt, running his hand along the stone. Not much, just traces, but maybe enough to make a man greedy. He looked around, then noticed something strange at the far end of the chamber. A wooden crate half buried under debris. He brushed off the dust and pried it open. Inside were papers, sealed in oilcloth, still dry despite the years. He unwrapped one and scanned it quickly. It's a deed, he said. Land rights. Red Hollow all the way to the river. Clara's voice was a whisper. So that's what they're after. He nodded. Whoever controls this land controls every claim in the valley. That letter you saw, it wasn't just a message. It was proof. Before he could say more, a gunshot echoed through the mine loud and close. The sound ricocheted off the walls, followed by a voice that made Clara's blood run cold. You can't hide forever, cowboy. The rancher turned sharply. The voice was close, too close. A shadow moved at the edge of the chamber, the glow of a torch flickering against the walls. Another shot cracked, striking the stone inches from his shoulder. Clara ducked, the sound ringing in her ears. The rancher fired back once, then pulled her behind a fallen beam. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. Stay down, he hissed. The men's voices grew louder. There were at least 3 of them now, their boots crunching against the loose gravel as they moved closer. Spread out. Check every tunnel. The rancher leaned close to Clara. We can't fight them all, but we can use the mine. How? She whispered. He looked toward the beams overhead, cracked and splintered with age. If I can bring part of it down, it might buy us time. She caught his arm. You'll be trapped too. He met her gaze, eyes steady. I'll figure something out. Before she could protest, he slipped out from behind the beam and moved toward the far wall, keeping low. The men's torches flickered closer now, their shadows long and twisted against the rock. Clara's heart pounded. She could see him working quickly, loosening the supports with the butt of his revolver, every move silent and careful. Then one of the men spotted him. There, behind the rocks! Gunfire exploded through the chamber. Clara screamed and dropped to the ground as bullets tore through the air. The rancher fired back, his shots sharp and precise, hitting one torch and plunging half the chamber into darkness. Then came a deep groan from the earth itself. A sound like thunder rolled through the mine as the weakened beams began to crack. Dust rained from the ceiling, followed by chunks of rock. Get back, he shouted, grabbing Clara and pulling her toward the tunnel. The men cursed and stumbled as the ground shook beneath them. The ceiling gave way in a roar, filling the chamber with smoke and debris. When the noise finally settled, the air was thick with dust. The rancher and Clara crouched near the tunnel mouth, coughing, trying to see through the haze. Behind them, the chamber had collapsed completely, sealing off the passage. Clara turned to him, her voice hoarse. "Are they?" He shook his head. "Don't look back." They stumbled deeper into the tunnel, moving by feel more than sight. The ground sloped upward now, leading toward another exit. The faint scent of fresh air reached them, and for a moment Clara thought they might have made it out. But then from somewhere behind the wall of rubble came a sound, a slow scrape of stone. Then another. The rancher stopped, listening. "They're still alive," Clara whispered. He nodded grimly, his face pale in the lantern light. "And they'll dig their way out." Outside, the first light of dawn was starting to touch the horizon, painting the canyon rim with a faint red glow. The wind whistled through the rocks, carrying the echoes of the collapse down the valley. The rancher looked out toward the open land beyond. "This isn't over yet." Clara followed his gaze, her breath trembling. "Then what do we do now?" He holstered his gun, eyes fixed on the rising sun. "We finish what they started." The wind picked up again, cold and sharp, scattering dust across the canyon floor. Somewhere far below, the sound of shifting stone continued, men clawing their way through the dark. And as the light spread over the valley, the rancher knew the real fight was still coming. The past had clawed its way to the surface, and it wasn't letting go. The first light of morning stretched across the canyon, turning the rock walls a pale gold. The air was crisp, scented with dust, sage, and the lingering smoke from the collapse. Clara and the rancher crouched behind a pile of boulders near the top of the ridge, breathing hard, muscles aching from the climb. Below, the remnants of the mine chamber were silent. The men who had pursued them were nowhere in sight. For a moment, the canyon felt vast and empty, like a world holding its breath. Clara leaned against a rock, wincing as she shifted. Are they gone?" The rancher shook his head. "Not gone, just stopped for now. That collapse bought us time, but they'll be back. Men like that don't quit easy." She swallowed hard, wrapping her arms around herself. "I can't believe this is finally over. Or at least that we survived it." He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. "Survival ain't everything, Clara. Sometimes you gotta make sure what you're living for is worth it." She followed his gaze to the distant valley. The post office in Red Hollow, the small cabins, the river glinting in the morning sun. All of it seemed impossibly small after the night they'd endured. And yet it was life, ordinary life, which now felt sacred. They moved cautiously down the slope toward the canyon floor, sticking to shadows and loose brush. The horses they'd left at the plateau were gone. The rancher had hidden them near another ridge. As they approached, Clara noticed the signs of their pursuers' retreat: trampled brush, scattered tools, and a faint trail of dust curling into the valley below. "They're leaving," she whispered. "Not for long," he said, checking the saddle and reins. "But we've got a head start." The ride back was tense but quiet. Both of them remained alert, eyes scanning the valley, ears straining for any sound that didn't belong. The rancher moved steadily, carefully, while Clara clung to him, learning to trust his instincts in a way she hadn't before. Each turn in the trail brought her closer to understanding the measure of courage it took to survive in a place like this, where the land could be as unforgiving as the men who lived by its lawless rules. They reached the edge of the valley by mid-morning. From here, the town of Red Hollow lay within view, the tiny cluster of wooden buildings bathed in soft sunlight. It looked peaceful, unchanged, almost like a painting. But Clara knew better now. She knew the shadows beneath the calm, the danger that had chased her across the canyon, and the greed that men would risk everything to claim. "Do you think we should go back?" she asked, uncertainty in her voice. The rancher shook his head. "Not yet. We need to be sure they're finished." They found a small abandoned cabin on the outskirts of the valley where they could rest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tend to their wounds and gather their strength. The rancher had brought water and a small pack of supplies from his saddlebag, and Clara helped him tend to minor cuts and bruises. Her side still hurt, but it wasn't as raw as before. Sitting across from each other by the fire, Clara finally let her voice break the silence. "I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to do any of this for me." He shrugged. "Maybe not, but sometimes you do the right thing 'cause it needs doing, not 'cause it's easy or safe." She nodded, letting the words sink in. There was a quiet strength in him that she hadn't expected, a sense of honor and resolve that ran deeper than the canyon itself. For all the violence and fear, She realized that it was his steadiness that had kept them alive. Hours passed as they sat in the cabin, listening to the wind and the distant sounds of life waking in the valley. Clara took out the map and deed they had recovered from the mine, smoothing it carefully across the table. The rancher watched her, the firelight flickering over his rugged features. "They're out there somewhere," she said softly. "The men who chased us. But with proof. It can't be used against anyone else," he nodded. "It's right where it belongs now. Nobody else will have it. Not if we keep it safe." Clara looked up at him. "You've saved more than just me. You've stopped a lot of trouble before it even started." He didn't answer immediately, only stared into the flames. Then he said, "Sometimes survival ain't just about getting through the night. Sometimes it's about making sure the next day comes easier for someone else." The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley. They packed their few supplies and prepared to ride back toward Red Hollow. Clara mounted first, testing the horse's strength and balance after the climb. The rancher followed, keeping a careful watch. The trail down to town was quiet, but Clara noticed how different everything seemed. The buildings, the fences, the familiar streets, all of it seemed more fragile now, more precious. The valley no longer felt ordinary. It held the memory of fear, courage, and the nights spent hiding from men who would kill for greed. As they entered the outskirts of Red Hollow, townsfolk began to notice them. A few stopped their chores to watch the pair ride past, cloaked in dust and quiet triumph. Clara felt eyes on her, but she held her head high. She had survived. She had a chance at life again. The rancher guided her to the post office where she had once worked. It was still standing, untouched by the violence that had stalked them, a symbol of normalcy waiting for her return. She dismounted and ran her hand across the weathered wood of the building. I think it's time to set things right," she said softly. He nodded. "You got that right. But don't forget, sometimes the world doesn't wait for you to be ready. You've got to move forward even if it's hard." Clara took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, she felt a measure of peace. The danger wasn't gone entirely. The men who had pursued her could still exist somewhere. But she knew she was no longer helpless. She had allies, a safe place, and the proof that could stop more violence. The rancher mounted his horse again, preparing to leave. Clara hesitated. "Will you stay in town? Just for a little while?" He gave a small, wry smile. "I'll check the herd first, but maybe I'll stick around long enough to make sure things stay quiet." She smiled faintly, understanding that he had his own life and burdens. Still, for the moment, it was enough that he had stood beside her when it mattered most. Together, they looked out over the valley. The sun was fully risen now, spilling light across the landscape. Birds began to stir in the trees. Somewhere down by the river, children's laughter rang out faintly. Life, despite everything, continued. Clara clutched the map and deed to her chest. "It feels different now," she said. "Like I can finally breathe." The rancher nodded, watching her. "Life's got a way of giving you chances, even after it takes a lot. Don't waste 'em." She looked at him with gratitude, her voice firm. "I won't." As they turned back toward town, the shadows of the past remained behind them in the canyon. The men, the chase, the fear, they were memories now, tempered by courage, survival, and the knowledge that truth could stand when lies and greed were exposed. Clara walked slowly into the post office, dusting off her hands. The building smelled faintly of old paper and ink, a simple reminder that life could continue, even after the darkness had pressed close. The rancher lingered at the door, his hand resting lightly on the frame. "You sure you're ready for this?" She nodded, standing a little taller than before. "I am." He tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and started down the road, keeping an eye on the horizon. Clara watched him go, then turned to the post office with a renewed sense of purpose. There were letters to sort, ledgers to balance, and a town that needed her steady hands and sharp mind. The valley stretched endlessly before them, quiet now, yet full of life and possibility. The shadows of the canyon were behind them, but the lessons learned in the night remained. Courage in the face of fear, the strength of trust, and the knowledge that even ordinary people could stand against extraordinary danger. Clara opened the door and stepped inside, the sunlight spilling across the floor. For the first time in weeks, she felt the weight on her chest lift. She was alive, she was free, and she had a chance to live her life without fear. Outside, the wind whispered through the valley, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. The rancher's horse clopped steadily down the road, the sound mingling with the quiet life of Red Hollow beginning its day. And somewhere in that vast, rugged land, the canyon held its secrets. But the danger that had once stalked Clara was no longer a shadow pressing down. The sun climbed higher, the valley warming with promise. Life had returned to its rhythm, slower, steadier, and yet more vivid for all that had passed. Clara smiled faintly to herself as she set to work, aware that though fear could come again, she now had the strength, allies, and courage to face it. And in that small old town, amidst the dust and the timbered buildings, she knew that she had survived, not just the chase, not just the night, but the test of her own will. The canyon, the chase, and the darkness had taught her something she would carry always, even in the hardest nights. Courage and persistence could bring a new dawn. The wind shifted again, rustling the trees, carrying with it a sense of calm. Red Hollow awoke, quiet and steady, and Clara stepped fully into the light, ready to live.